Sometimes we need to stop the probable and the likely and embrace the unbelievable quietly and yet deliberately, following the whispers, the nudges, and the very dreams of God. When we talk about the New Testament, we're really engaging ourselves in reading over the shoulder of someone else's mail. These are conversations recorded for a time and place where it wasn't intended to be, and certainly was not thought to be still necessary 2,000 years later as testimonies or facts to be embraced as news stories of how it happened and reportings of the early faith. Now, to remind us in our journey, we have two infancy stories recorded in four Gospels. The simple reason why four Gospels was that some of the early fathers of the church, one in particular, thought that as there are 4 points on a compass, so there must be 4 points of Jesus's life story. Now, we shouldn't look at these as biographies in the sense of a biography today of Barack Obama or Abraham Lincoln or any historical figure. They are biographical yet plus. And our only two infant stories come to us from two very different Gospels. Luke is probably the most familiar. The manger, the heavenly host singing, the shepherds. The one that's just as familiar and more often than not conflated with the other is Matthew's. Matthew has the Magi, or as we call them around here, the wise guys. These mysterious Gentile astrologers traveling from the east, seeking the King of the Jews and following his star that has arisen in the east. Matthew, if we're looking over the shoulder of someone, we're looking over the shoulder of a Jewish Jesus believer. For that's what Matthew is writing to, an audience that has been kicked out of their synagogue for their affirmation, their firm belief that this rabbi, this teacher of the law, that seemed to teach in a way like Moses and yet better than Moses, is really God's agent, God's anointed one, the Messiah, the Son of David who is to come, and has come in flesh and blood, and has shared what it now is to continue to be Jewish. So Matthew is an emphasis on Judaism with Christ in it, even though the first readers of Matthew would be wanting the assurance that having been expelled from the very heart of their faith in the synagogue and being considered outsiders, that they are still part of God's story and plan, and that this is what Jesus' instructions are about. That it does include the Gentiles in these final days, as all the New Testament seem to believe it was in. So it's helpful for us to read these passages not as news reports, but as Jewish reports, as stories that affirm and confirm a faith that has been expelled, beliefs that still ought to be kept, that God is still doing and moving in impossible places and schemes and has provided yet a way to remain, even if the relations have been severed in disagreement. Matthew's story begins with a genealogy, and I'm sure many of you would be glad to never be assigned a reading to read all the names. 2 sets of 14 that trace a lineage of Joseph. Joseph back to David and back to Abraham. You see, genealogies tell a story forward as well as backward, and Matthew speaks of this with the finesse that this person, this supposed son of Joseph, is not only an heir of David, Israel's greatest king, but also an heir of Abraham, the founder of the Jewish faith. And not only that, but he comes as new Moses. The Sermon on the Mount is a soaring discussion of the Torah, which unfortunately has been translated often as the law, and as if it's something that we no longer need, we no longer apply, it's no longer necessary, when frankly the teaching is everlasting. As even Jesus says, none of it disappears, but comes to fulfill. This language of fulfillment gives us a problem. Frankly, we think of fulfillment in the same way as Amazon does. Fulfillment centers, right? Where everything that's needed is provided for. And in a sense, in our fast-paced, materialistic, always be possessed by possessions world, it means that something's been achieved and cannot be filled further. It has been met. It has been qualified. There is no additional need for. So it's unfortunate that Matthew's candid language of fulfillment associated with prophets and prophecies comes into play here, where we think of prophecy as predictions and foretellings rather than foretellings. And what Matthew does is pull texts that were never prophecies in the first place, not in the classic sense of a prophet foretelling things, or forthtelling things, I should say, telling things as they were, saying, here's where God is today, acting now. And instead we get the mistaken understanding that somehow there's a pattern of predicting something centuries before that is fulfilled in centuries to come. When all Matthew was implying was that these are in the same vein, the same element, the same expectation. This is God working now, just as he did before, and a pattern that God continues to repeat. So it's less about accomplishment and more about the ongoing work of God. And what did God bring to pass? And Joseph, who's always associated with Mary, is the silent, quiet, obedient, and righteous man who shepherds, in a sense, the dream of God, keeps it safe, watches out for it, even when it's unbelievable what he has heard and what he must do. We encounter Joseph at a point of decision as our first encounter with him just after these genealogies. He's a man tormented in a sense. We know he's agonizing over it being disclosed. We don't know how. Matthew is silent on that, but somehow he knows that Mary, his betrothed, his engaged person, the 1-year engagement, this arranged marriage, is somehow by the Spirit with child. Now, in the patriarchal rules and regulations of his time and place, Joseph could literally dismiss her and call it off. And as the rules of engagement are, only the man can call it off. The woman would be disgraced. So Joseph, being a careful person, is considering the options and does not want to put Mary through the custom of shaming, if not the threat to her life for being found to be an unwed Jewish mother-to-be. And it was at this point, when in your life has there been a time where a decision needed to be made and you were about to do it and something suddenly told you no? Well, for each of the times that a decision needed to be known, Joseph has a dream with an angel. The angel's never named, unlike Gabriel and Zechariah or Gabriel and Mary. It's just an angel of the Lord in the dream told Joseph not to be afraid or hesitant to take Mary as his wife. For this is the Lord's doing. This is part of God's plan for the world. And you're not to name him after you, which was the custom, but to name him as Jehovah is salvation. Joshua, one who is victorious with God. Jesus. And so, Joseph does what the angel tells him to do. He does not fulfill his marriage rights and privileges until after the firstborn son arrives. But yet we see with Joseph being an exemplary, righteous follower of the teachings of Moses, that he would do the right thing. And in a dream, if told otherwise, unbelievable though it may be, to follow it anyway. In total, we have 5 dreams and 5 responses with Joseph. And so it comes to pass that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. And because of the wise men's information, Herod is able to anticipate and order the death of children. There's no historical evidence of this, although certainly what historical evidence there is of Herod the Great is truly horrifying. The only reason he has 3 sons survive him is because he died before the execution orders were for one of them. And so, being warned in a dream, yet again, Joseph never speaks. We never hear Joseph's voice at all. We only hear the angel's message and we see Joseph's response to go to Egypt. The common place in that part of the empire, in that area of the world where refugees went often when their nations were in turmoil, distress, famine. This place of shelter, but also this place of slavery for the ancient Israelites. Playing out in reverse, where frankly the threat of domination is so strong in Israel that actual freedom is found in Egypt for a time. And so Joseph, usually depicted as holding a lamp, guides the Holy Family fleeing Bethlehem away from Herod and his soldiers to the safety of Egypt. And again, for each of these scenes, Matthew portrays a prophetic fulfillment that really is neither one in that sense. But to say that this is again God at work, God responding. The next time we catch Joseph is after the death of Herod and when he hears that Archelaus, Herod's son, is on the throne in Judea. And history records that Archelaus killed the first 3,000 influential people in Jerusalem. Archelaus was so bad that the Romans removed him from his throne. Joseph flees to Nazareth, but only after being warned in a dream. I bet in your life there has been dreams you've heeded and dreams you've ignored. Dreams that were funny and didn't make any sense. Genuine nightmares that woke you from your slumbers, but were not based in real fears or risks to your life. It's interesting that in this exchange, it comes to us when we're not fully conscious, when we're thought to be asleep, when we have left, in a sense, the world as it is and are in that between space where the Spirit can still speak to us, where we can encounter the message and not be fully aware of it. Joseph, as his namesake in the Old Testament was able to do, was able to interpret dreams in such a way to follow the message where it went. What dreams has God given to you that seem impossible, unbelievable, but yet may be a message of the angels? Messengers of God nudging us forward, forcing us to respond, contemplating our next move. Joseph had the gift of courage to respond each of the 5 times he dreamed for the safety and protection of the Holy Family, of Mary and his newborn son, Jesus, to carry God's plan through to its final fulfillment. And after these scenes, Joseph falls not only silent, but disappears entirely from the text. Jesus will be called 2 sons, well, 3 if we think about it: Son of God, Son of David, oftentimes by outsiders, and also the son of Joseph. May we have the gift of courage that Joseph had in protecting the Christ child who has been born as his responsibility and to be given to the world. May the nudge, the dream, the hint, the gut feeling persuade us that perhaps messages are still coming, and give us the courage to believe the unbelievable, to trust the messenger, and to deliver on God's dream. Amen.